this idea. This is a photo that you can easily find, and you're of course in Taormina, looking out on the mother of Sicily, Etna. And there's a city that is under Etna. And in Greek, kata means under, so Catania means under Etna. You knew that, I'm sure. So it is a city which has been overtaken by lava many times. And I think something like 90% of its architecture and structure is made up of good, dark basaltic lava. But people have lived with Mount Etna for many, many thousands of years. And it adds so much to Sicily, not just topography, but the lava, which as it spreads even westward, mixes with the calcareous alkali soils with high pH, and the lava has low pH with mafic minerals and it's silicious material. So it creates a perfect agronomy for soil balance. You cannot imagine how rich the soil of this island is, the largest island in the Mediterranean, the crossroads of history. And with that, it's why the Greeks, after Plato, actually before Plato mentioned this, but they cut down a lot of their trees in Greece, and because the soil in Greece is mostly limestone calcareous based, they could grow crops there, especially on the Rhytian plain, where Demeter and Persephone lived for a while in mythology and spread agriculture. But when the Greeks migrated in the 8th century BCE to Sicily, leaving their rocky, eroded mainland, they came to Sicily and found that hardly had they planted grains in the ground and they germinated so powerfully and quickly, they called this island Persephone's Island because of its fertility. And right where the two soils meet, the lava and the calcareous soil, which would be to the right of this picture, that's called the Vale of Enna, the valley where Persephone scampered with the maids. And literally Persephone's Isle. You probably know cookbooks with that same name. So here we are, and let's look at what we're going to cover. Today is mostly introductory, but we'll have a good stint of prehistory going back to the Paleolithic and Neolithic. But this is why I think Sicily is so important. The largest island in the Mediterranean, crossroads of history. It's easy to see because the Straits of Messina, not even 3 miles across, connect Sicily to mainland Italy to Calabria. And of course, it's very close, only 100 miles to Africa from Cape Bone to Cape Lilybæum. And we could go on, but it has had a long history of human occupation, at least since the Paleolithic. And there's some fascinating points about that, when the Mediterranean used to be a playa, an evaporated basin, dry, except for some places. And so you can see when the sea rose in, when the sea came in, sometimes associated with Atlantis, but definitely associated with the breakage of the sill in the Black Sea and the breakage of the sill at Gibraltar. I was in Cadiz, Spain this last year, and have you ever stood in Cadiz and looked out at the water? The water in Cadiz from the Atlantic is flowing from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean. There's more water that evaporates out of the Mediterranean than flows in. Think of the great rivers, the Nile, the Rhone, the Po, the Danube, etc. Those rivers pour a lot of water into the Mediterranean, but the Atlantic pours more coming from that current flowing in from the west. So more water evaporates out than flows in. And fascinatingly, you can see the changes in occupation once the Mediterranean basin filled up. And we can see that even today a little bit on artifactual and maritime and even the sea marine resources. So long occupation since the Paleolithic, that means at least before 11,000 or 12,000 years ago. And some of the things that are sort of, if you think of comparanda, you think of superlatives about Sicily, you probably already know that maybe, not because it was isolated, since it's the junction of so many different directions, but it has, fascinatingly, much better preserved Greek temples than Greece does. The best preserved Greek temples are in Sicily, and I count at least a dozen Greek temples in Sicily. You'll see a few in a few weeks. But also the context of Homer, both the Iliad and especially the Odyssey, and all kinds of marvelous creatures, mermaids, etc. The mythology around Sicily is intense and very specific. So sometimes Homer gives us direct references to Mount Etna and other things, and the coast of what we call the Ionian Sea. So we'll see that too, the mythology, and we'll even reference some of that today with Trichania, the triangular island. And of course, not only does it have the best and most preserved Greek temples, it also has the most and best preserved Roman mosaics. You've probably been to Villa Casale, and you know that Roman villa, which was probably an imperial residence, possibly Maximian, one of the tetrarchs, somewhere late 4th century, late 3rd century, early 4th century. There are 55,000 square feet of mosaics in that one structure alone. 55,000 square feet. You've probably seen them. And then, of course, because for a year in the 7th century, Syracuse was the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a short year or two, but also because later the Norman kings brought in Greek and Byzantine mosaicists to fill the Palazzo Normanni, to fill Monreale. The best Greek Byzantine mosaics are also there. So we can say Christian contexts of the Orthodox tradition, but it also was an interesting hybridity between the Latin church and the Greek church. The Roman and Orthodox churches, you see in some of these places, both Greek and Latin together. And one of the most fascinating times in history, the very inclusive 12th century, when you can go around Palermo and you can see inscriptions written in 4 languages because everybody was welcome. You see Arabic, you see Hebrew, you see Greek, and you see Latin inscriptions because they were all welcome. And the great kings like Frederick, the Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. Well, I've had to be careful here because this is a Jesuit community. But you know, Frederick was excommunicated twice, and not for very good reasons. He was someone who spoke 7 languages and wrote 5, a genius, and he actually got excommunicated because in the 6th Crusade, he did not shed 1 drop of Saracen blood. Instead, he married the daughter of the king of Jerusalem to get Jerusalem back. It's a long story. We'll get there in time. But it also has, Sicily, the incredible Baroque cities that after, as you know, the end of the 17th century, in the 1690s, a massive earthquake because of the plate tectonics separating Europe and Africa, and that ridge along the east coast of Sicily. You can follow the line of volcanoes all the way up that line, because you not only have Strombolian volcano and Etna and Pantelleria and Lipari, but you also have Vesuvius and the Alban Hills, Bolsena. That line of volcanoes, where that rift between the continents is, it essentially destroyed most of the cities on the east coast, the Ionian coast of Sicily. So they rebuilt to a new architectural order. And being Sicily, it wasn't just Baroque, it was uber Baroque. You know this. You've been to Ragusa, Syracuse, Ibla, and some of those other Noto, Modica. If you haven't, you'll see them in pictures. So the best preserved Baroque cities. Now, some people don't like Baroque. You know, I would admit that Baroque can be over embellished at times, but I mean, when you think of Sicilian sweets and eye candy and the dolce of Sicily, Baroque is one of those that looks like it's been made in a fantasy at times, that Baroque. So, and of course, the tradition of tin glazed ceramics, tin glazed with other colors, the Majolica, some call it Majolica, the tradition's there. I'll show you some pictures of each of these things. But then there's also, as I mentioned, the astonishing fertility of the soil and the cornucopia of food there. Plus, Goethe, we'll get back to him. Sicily, you could say in part to Garibaldi, I won't thank him, but he kind of homogenized Italy. And Sicily held out, even though they were overtaken by Garibaldi's troops. Sicily held out so that it's preserved old Italy better. Now, it's still, as you know today, sort of an autonomous province, like Valle d'Aosta. So it doesn't always cater to Rome or the Florentine traditions or whatever, but it is a place where so much is preserved. And I've probably given you all 8 lectures in one very brief synopsis, but Goethe said, and you know this famous portrait of Goethe by Tischbein, Goethe in his Italienische Reise in 1787, when he went to Sicily, he said some interesting things. After visiting all of Italy, he stayed in Sicily the longest, and this is what he said. To have seen Italy without having seen Sicily is not to have seen Italy at all, for Sicily is the key to everything. That's what Goethe said. And you may know him with Dorothea or Werther or Faust or whatever, but I would agree because I sit where Goethe sat in Taormina at the Greco-Roman Theater, in the top of the Cavea, looking out on the Ionian Sea, and he said, this is the Bella Vista. This is the Buon Veduta. This is the best view from this seat in the world. And I always go there and play my flute there. Anyway, it's a wonderful place, Sicily. So now, this is a book you could read. I love anything by John Julius Norwich. And what a colorful life he had too, recently deceased. But it's a pretty good book, and he's written several on Sicily. And I would trust what he says about Sicily. And then, of course, let's look at the crossroads. Can you see where Sicily lies? 3 miles from Calabria, 100 miles from North Africa, from the Maghreb. And of course, it has been literally occupied by so many different civilizations, each of which left a very indelible stamp on Italy. And sometimes at the same time, which created this incredible hybridity, this confluence of cultures. So when you go, for example, to Palermo, and you look at the beautiful cathedral of Palermo, you see that much of it was built by Islamic architects. And the same thing could be said elsewhere. This fusion that you see in Sicily. So, crossroads of civilization, we'll talk about all the different peoples who came there. And, you know, we're talking, of course, you can just see from prehistory, the Mycenaeans, probably from Africa, the Sicani, probably from Italy, the Sicels, possibly from Anatolia, Phoenicians from the Levant, the Greeks as well from the Aegean, the Romans from the north, Muslims from the south, again, Africa, Byzantines from the east, Normans, and there's another curious story, how the Normans combined Germanic Holy Roman Emperor potentates with some of the local tradition, with as well Norman blood, meaning Viking blood. So it's what a place this is to have all that richness. And then, of course, later the Angevin French, and then the Bourbons. You could go on and on and on about the different cultures and peoples who have left their stamp on this place. Now, here is just a quick map of Sicily. You can see its topographic, and you can see the white on the right is Mount Etna at over 10,000 feet. You can see the mountains in the north and down the spine. You can also see some of the fertile valleys, but literally 10,000 square miles. That's pretty big when you think about it, 25,500 square meters. And if we look at Sicily from different points of view, if we look at the mountains and the rivers, etc., those are the mountain masses or ranges. And of course, Etna is the obvious one standing out, but you have the Peloritani Mountains on the upper northeast near Messina. You have the Nebrodi Mountains in the north, along with the Madonia Mountains in the north. I'll never forget driving through those mountains in a private car. I was trying to get photos of the snow masses. And you've all probably encountered this risk, yes? You're driving by and you roll down the window and you stick your phone out the window to get a picture. The wind whips your phone right out of your hand, yes? And the private car will stop and the driver will say, I don't know if anything's left, and go back. And it was completely untouched by phone. It must, had some kind of blessing on it. It didn't even have a scratch on it. It bounced with its rubber case. But those mountains, when they're covered with snow above the brush, are beautiful. And here, when we look at the northern masses of mountains, from Etna to Nebrodi to Peloritani to Madonia, we also have to remember the Sicani Hills, the limestone mountains of the west, between Palermo, Segesta, Agrigento, and the vineyards, of course, the Marsala and the other vineyards all over Sicily. Some of the great families of the 18th and 19th century, again, fusing Italian and British families, like the Whitakers, who started industries, wine industries there because the soil is so good. And then, of course, in the middle of Sicily, the Aegean Mountains, in the Iblaean, it used to be spelled Hybla after an old Greek colony. But you have all these mountains, and of course, right above Palermo, you have Monte Pellegrino, which, as you know in Italian, is the mountain of pilgrims. Pèlerin in French, Pellegrino means pilgrim, as you know. So there are a lot of monasteries also on that mountain and convents. What a great place to see a vertical landscape as well as a horizontal. Now here in the Bay Area, we kind of get the mix of the horizontal with the ocean and the bay, with the hills around us of Marin and South and so on. It's nice to have a landscape that is both horizontally and vertically aesthetically pleasing. And Sicily has that. Sometimes pretty jagged mountains that also are good for eye pleasure. Now, the rivers as well, the Belice in the southwest, the Platani in sort of the south middle, what's either called the Imera or the Salso that runs up, and it's probably one of the longer rivers. And then, of course, you have the Discilo, or here you can just see this, sometimes called Discilo, sometimes Dirillo, the Simeto covering the Catanian plain, the Anapo flowing through Syracuse, the Alcantara and the gorge there between the Nebrodi and Peloritani and Etna. These are just the mountain ranges or mountain masses and rivers that we see. And this is this mythological symbol of Sicily. It's on the flag. And what is it? Well, it is somewhat mythological and monstrous. You see it all over Sicily, but it's called Trinacria, meaning sort of, you could say, 3 coasts, 3 points, 3 whatever. Because Sicily, of course, there's another Maiolica version of it, probably sitting somewhere now on a tree in my backyard. But the 3 capes, Cape Peloro, Cape Passero, and Cape Lilibio, this sort of triangular shape. Now, whether they knew it had a triangular shape or not, they didn't see it from space or from above the air, but they still knew they had to round these 3 capes in navigation. So they knew it had 3 points to the island, Trinacria. And Trinacria is the mythological name for Sicily, and Homer uses that name as well, Trinacria. So now, leaving that, it has been for a long time, literally since the 18th century, a endpoint for the Grand Tour. And this was partly due to Goethe, but others who came and painted the romantic ruins here in Sicily, the Greek temples. And you can see you're below there, Agrigento, and you can see you're below, you're just here outside the temple of Hera, and you can see the distance, the temple, or Juno, you can see the temple of Concordia. Very romantic place. And that was part of this idea of romanticism coming just now at the end of the 18th century with ruins and the romance of the past. As I said, Goethe kind of helped start some of this with his novel that you may recall in 1774, The Sufferings of Young Werther, which blew away the facades of witty repartee and instead got to the gut of emotional discourse and honesty. And of course, the book was banned because it kind of ends in a suicidal story. But nonetheless, this idea of romanticism had Sicily as sort of its first landscape. And we could talk more about that. But this is a little folly right above the place where I always stay, above Mondello Bay. Does anybody here know Villa Egea? Oh, if you don't, you should. It's an old palazzo built by the inheritors of the Marsala fortune. And here, if you climb the hill, looking in this case east, that folly, which you could call a thalos or rotunda, it actually has on the inside that below that drum, it goes down 2 stories below ground. So the acoustics are incredible. And some of us who've been known to play musical instruments there find this to be, for acoustics, just about perfect. And this was a folly built by a Sicilian noble. And I think it's a lovely picture, don't you? Now, a little bit of Sicily. Scratch the rich earth of Sicily, and you will find Etna underneath, the great mother of Sicily, still smoking. Below poppy and wheat, Persephone's land, Hades and black rocks lurk. Ringed by sun-flashing seas, crowned by rosemary-scented hills, garlanded by olive and cypress trees, high in their white temples, old gods watch Greek ships sail along Selinunte, Agrigento, Syracuse, and the white cliffs of Taormina, their shell-like sails full of wind that whisper names of forgotten sirens. Maybe overtly lyrical. I hope that's not a fault, but that's Sicily to me. And when you think of Agrigento, remember what was called the Vale of Temples is actually a ridgeline of temples. And what did Pindar say? The great Boeotian Greek poet of the Archaic period. In the 6th century, Pindar said Agrigento. Of course, he called it Akragos by its Greek name, Akragos, which also has to do with heights. Akragos, Agrigento, the loveliest place on earth built by mortals. That's a Greek poet's opinion. I would agree. And the temples there, whether you are at Agrigento or Segesta, I love to be there in March because it's not hot and the flowers are all blooming wild in profusion. Whether Segesta or in Selinunte or in Agrigento, the wildflowers enhance this place. So now, I always take this picture of Taormina, usually from a hotel room, in this case, looking out on the coast of the Ionian Sea and Giardino Naxos, one of the old Greek colonies here, and you look on Etna, which always seems to be smoking or more. And of course, Taormina, the name comes from the old Tauromonium, because it looked like above the city were 2 peaks that looked like bullhorns, Tauromonium. And Taormina, as I said, if I ever retire, that's not a bad place to think about. The Bay Area is not too bad either. Now, let's look at some of the mosaics, for example. These are just some of the mosaics at Villa Casale. And they're, as far as we can understand, late 3rd, early 4th century, with a profusion of color and motifs. That may well be the Emperor Maximian down below on the bottom right, with the epaulette of emperorship, of imperium on him. You have so many different scenes, circus scenes, hunting scenes, love scenes, a lot of beautiful things in those mosaics. And then the architecture. Now, this is a church, San Cataldo, which is built by Islamic architects and created by Islamic design. And it's not the only one either, because you have, of course, San Giovanni Eremiti, just near the Norman Palace, and then you have the Ziza Palace in Palermo. And by the way, this palace was built after Christians took over the island. And yet the architecture at Ziza Palace is very much Islamic. And of course, San Giovanni, St. John the Hermit in Palermo. So there's a lot of Islamic fusion. And then, of course, you can see this on the backside of the great Cathedral of Monreale. That is that sort of intarsated inlay of basalt, lava, with limestone, the kind of decorative relief with the sort of ogival and crossing arches. And then, of course, also sometimes this is taken up, and the Cosmedin family borrows that sort of idea of tracery, that Islamic art, because if it, out of Saudi Arabia, if Islamic art borrowed from the Mosaic Code, the anti-iconic principle, you know what I mean? No images, don't imitate living things. So what happened? Well, because of that, Islamic architecture borrowed geometry and incorporated geometry in a meditative, almost mystical way. So you have that stamp of geometrization in the decor, which of course, again, is beautiful. Now, you go to Monreale. We'll be doing all these things in much more detail. This, by the way, was a fountain, and there are little spouts on the top of this head that branched out with water like a palm tree. It only stopped working a few centuries ago. But again, the idea of a siphon effect from water sources at the top of the mountain coming down, and the distance between the source and the user point, if it's a great distance, the water is going to push out, as you know from physics, with a siphon. So they're beautiful fountains. And Monreale is a great place. I think it's one of my favorite places in the world, because it has inside the basilica, it has the major Old Testament Hebrew narratives, and then it also has the New Testament narratives. So it's literally a Biblia Pauperum, a Bible for the poor, in great mosaic narratives. The whole Bible, well, not every part, but the really historic stories of the Bible are done in mosaic inside that cathedral. When I'm in there, and I will be having a small group of people there in March, it will take us 2 hours to get through those mosaics. We'll just spend a little bit of time on that here. Now, the great Pantocrator there, the all-powerful, the all-ruler, Christ the Pantocrator. And you can see Greek here, because these were Greek mosaicists. And you can just see here, Jesus Christos, the Pantocrator here. So breaking that up. And then, of course, you go to the other churches, La Morterana and San Cataldo, where you see great Byzantine mosaics. Here, the Rogerian Norman kings being crowned by God, which was a pretty common idea. And then the Nativity. And then this, as I said, the families like the Cosmati, who borrowed that sort of geometric style of Islamization and then took from a lot of Roman marbles and stone and recreated these mosaic tiles, or what we could call opus sectile. Beautiful work. Now, there in the Palatine Chapel of the Palazzo Normani, again, you can see a combination of Greek and Latin in the cherubim and seraphim, etc., surrounding, again, the Pantocrator. And remember, people like Montefoucauld and others said that this is the gem of Palermo, this little chapel. Now, the Baroque architecture, Ragusa Ibla, remember 1693 onward, when Sicily had to rebuild itself, it styled Baroque as literally the most current style. And wherever you go, and you know this great Duomo, we'll talk about that, underneath this Duomo is a Greek temple to Athena. You've probably seen that. So beautiful Baroque facades with, as I said, an enormous amount from literally, Bernini and Borromini and others didn't so much invent the Baroque, but the ideas that they took for mathematics and for Vitruvius, the Roman architect, combining in Baroque architecture some amazing things with broken pediments and articulation of in and out forms. And we could go on and on about the Baroque, but we will later. Modica as well. And then, as I said, Maiolica. Wherever you go in Sicily, Maiolica abounds. I don't know if anybody's climbed this staircase in Caltagirone. The Maiolica artists of Sicily are renowned, and I cannot go there without bringing a suitcase home full of Maiolica. And all across my backyard, on the fences, on the trees, on the whatever, I've got these Sicilian tiles. And my wife complains now the bathrooms are filled up also with, as well as the front porch steps. So I'm an addict. I don't apologize. Now, so Sicilian Maiolica is astonishing. And wherever you go, you see it. I think this one I have by my fireplace at home. And then, of course, the food. Remember what the Greek settlers found about the fertility of the soil. You probably all know Sicilian durum wheat, and you probably use the flour for semolina, for good pasta. I always check, if I buy Italian pasta in the grocery store, I check to see where it came from. And if I see semolina, durum, Sicily, I'm going to grab it. Really good wheat. Now, you can just sometimes see it written on the packages, okay? But then there's the other food, the rich seafood, the frutti del mare and so on in Sicily. Am I making you hungry? Yes. I hope you had some kind of lunch. This food of Sicily, the cannoli, the cassuto, and so on. The aubergine, right? The melanzane, whatever it is. Sicily. And of course, then there's the citrus, whether it's the aranciata, the blood orange, or lemons. Did you know that the whole valley next to Palermo, what's called the Conch of Gold, used to be filled with lemon trees, and the scent of lemon blossoms permeated miles of that area. And whatever it is, so orange groves, if you've driven between Caltanissetta and Catania, you go through thousands of acres of orange trees, and it's nice when they're blossoming too. So notice in the medieval Norman Rogerian dynasty, 11th, 12th centuries, the entire Conch of Gold was filled with lemon groves and the fragrance of their blossoms. So you could see why lemons are important on Maiolica in Sicily. So here, if you look at it, there's what was the Conch of Gold, and that was entire lemon groves. Now, where I grew up, my wife disputes the latter part of that, but where I grew up in Southern California, in San Diego, I lived in a city called Lemon Grove. It was was always scented with the air. So I can remember sort of what the conch of gold might have smelled like. And this is from Monreale, by the way, the Royal Mountain. Have you seen Citrus medica? Now, you know from Hebrew, perhaps, egos, if you know the Sukkot, the feast of Sukkot, you know that this is an important fruit. And it's called Citrus medica because it had very strong medical benefits. And you can go to Sicily and find these. Look at how big they can be. In fact, you can get a whole meal from these when you open them up. And they're very sweet, and you eat also the pith because it's good for you. So this is Citrus medica or Citrus limon. We can say Sicilianensis. That's more kind of a hybrid Latin Italian. But anyway, and then the fertility of the fruit and the markets. You have to go through the markets and see all that fruit. And by the way, it's fascinating, both in viticulture and wine and in farming. Sicily never adopted heavy nitrates, phosphates, artificial fertilizers. They eventually had laws against it. So Europe is now using sort of as a model the Sicilian non-GMO style of bearing fruit and food. So in my family, I know my children and I, we often try to buy organic food. And it's a little tricky to make sure it is, because there's a slippery line there with advertising. But in Sicily, it's all organic. They don't use artificial, they don't use insecticides if they can avoid it. Isn't it interesting? So non-insecticides and so on. All right, do I sound like a missionary? So Sicily, crossroads of civilizations. Let's go back to there, back to the map. As you can see, the Straits of Messina, which figure in the Odyssey, as you know, with the Charybdis and the Maelstrom. If you think of the Scylla and Charybdis of mythology, we'll get more to that. The Straits, it is a true oceanographic phenomenon there. But if you look at all the peoples in the geological map, it's a pretty complex place with the volcanics and the calcium carbonates. You can see Africa is subducting under Sicily along Etna, which creates that tectonic intensity and seismic uncertainty. So you can see that. That's where all the volcanoes lie here, because the African plate is diving into Europe and being pulled under where the Mediterranean is. And that creates these jagged coastlines of Italy and Greece. With that, of course, we already looked at the mountains and rivers of Sicily, with Etna dominating here. So when you look at the soil, the calcareous soil, the limestone soils, meeting with the volcanic soils, that's about as perfect as you could get right there. The Valley of Persephone at Enna. So I was there, I guess I've been there just about every year or so since the late 1990s. And there used to be ski resort you could get on a funicular, but they all got ripped out by the lava. The lava just pulled down much of the ski resorts. They've been rebuilt today. But now the lava, because it's not so much that it doesn't erode slowly, but now you have a whole sections of new plant habitats growing up there. And I'll never forget the richest valerian. Do you know valerian, the plant? The beautiful blue, reddish magenta flowers. By the way, good for sleep, if you know. The valerian fields, whole fields, acres upon acres of valerian fields, that the heat and the rich mafic volcanic soil created a whole new valerian habitat along that junction between the forests of Etna and the lava. And so with that mountain, also, you can see that there are many, many wineries along the rim. And those wineries create really good wine, sort of a volcanic pop to the soil. You may know some of these wines from Mount Etna, highly, highly rated wines with that rich volcanic soil. So it continues to blow. Remember, for millennia, it's been called the mother of Sicily because it created so much of the Sicilian context. And whether you're mid-island, now notice the richness of this soil because you're midway between the volcanic soils and the limestone soils. And this is where most of the semolina, the durum wheat, the semolina flour from the durum wheat is grown. It is so rich. And with that, you can see the Sakati Mountains in the west. You could go to Marsala or Trapani. You may be able to see all the vineyards that go all the way to the distance in the background. Some of the wines, I'm not going to name all 30 wines of Sicily, but you probably know this one. You probably also know a wine of Sicily called Malvasia. Now, Malvasia, again, like Marsala vineyards, this was a grape that came from Greece. It came from the Peloponnesus, and it was from a place called Monemvasia in the Peloponnesus of Greece. Monemvasia was shortened to Malvasia. Then they took that grape to the channel, the islands. You think of the Canaries and the Azores, and it became Malvasia became Malmsey from Madeira. So this is a long story for grape history, but Sicily is where most of the grape changed historically to become what it is now. So beautiful places. So who came there? Well, from Italy, the Italiote and Aeolian migration came. From Africa and the Maghreb migration. From the Phoenicians and Punic and Levantine and others. You had Punic migration. Of course, you had Greek and Luvian Anatolian migration. Everybody came to Sicily. Did you know that around the year 1200, Messina was the center of the European silk trade? Did you know that? Guess who ran it? Jewish silk merchants. And they were protected by the Norman kings. That's where the center. If you've read Boccaccio, and he talks about the most light-filled, erudite, scholastic, academic, cultured city in the 12th century in all of Europe was Palermo. So you could read more about this, but Palermo itself comes from the Greek word panormus, because the Greeks were there, the Phoenicians were there before them, but all these peoples who have come to Sicily. Now, let's talk. I think we better take a break before we get to prehistory. So that's the introduction to see what we're going to cover for the next 7 weeks. But let's stop and take a quick break so I can get to the prehistory. All right, quick break. And we'll have questions when we come back. Isn't it a beautiful place?
How are you been?
Good, Jerry. How are you?
Good, good.
Don't just leave there.
That pandemic sort of threw everyone. Oh, no. No, you're carbs anymore.
Okay, you're wise.
I'm trying, the pandemic sort of ruined a lot of things. We went up to Ashland for the Shakespeare Festival. That almost went out of business.
Yeah. Oh, it's
Here,
been,
but-
here too. It's hard. It's been hard. Nobody has recovered, really. Let me turn this off for a
This is
second.
coming back very nicely. I think this quarter.
You're a trustee, aren't you? Yeah.
Like in the old days, Robert let me take 7 or 8 courses.
Yeah.
And now they have this thing where you can sort of, well, you can eat if you pay ahead of time. So that's terrific.
You're a board member, as I recall.
I am, yeah.
You have the vision to do that. So I'm going to plug this back in.
There are tremendous people, the board chief is the father of the Daniel Lurie, Brian.
Yes, the rabbi.
My son and I were invited to the inauguration because my son went both to grade school and high school with Daniel.
Oh, wow.
Town school and
Oh, wow.
boys and then university.
Wow.
High school. It was very impressive.
Yeah.
It was very professional. Everything worked. He gave a very, very nice acceptance speech. And he just rang all the right bells and it was very encouraging.
Well, and one of the reasons why I love the Fromm, I always joke about this, that it's a Jesuit place, right? Jesuit and Jews together, both with high academic standards. And I love being there. I don't know how many students are in the class. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry? Okay. Alan made a whole batch, but I don't know where they went. They were outside. We might need more.
I'll bring
Okay.
some more copies, Professor.
Hey, Dawa's making some more copies now. Thank you, Dawa. All right, so that what we covered before was our sort of introduction to where we're going for the next 7 weeks. But are there any questions before we pick up now? Any questions? Yes, Jerry. Yes, yes. Yeah, at one point, Sicily, as far as we can go back in the geology, Jerry's question was, Dr. Overman's question was Sicily once connected to Italy? Yes and no, but Sicily's also an eruptive mass that came also because of that plate tectonic boundary. But the cliffs along Calabria and along the Peloritani are pretty steep, which suggests that connection may have happened before the split took place. Geological ages, several 100 million years ago plus, because the main continental drift ideas are about 200 million years when the continent started dividing from Pangea. So somewhere either before that or around that time. But the other question that was asked, I think, and I'm sorry to say that the trip that we have planned for Sicily in March was put off from 2020. So that list filled 3 years ago easily. And we have another list that we're creating now for probably 2026. If you're interested, come see me. I think, Robert, you're already at the top of that list. Okay. So we only take about, we try to take under, we never take more than 15, including myself. And we always have to hire an Italian guide, specifically because that's by law. But our Italian guides mostly let me talk. They take us where we need to go, but I probably probably do much of the talking, and I may not know all the local material, so they do that. But our trips, we only stay in, I hate to say it, expensive places. So we think that you should have a spa at the end of the day, if you so wish. Yes, sir. Usually minimum 10 days, minimum. And we find that it's best to travel with a group about 15 or less. When you're in a museum, you can't fit around a vitrine if there are 30 of you to look at a display. So they're small groups, 10-day minimum. And I don't know the cost. All I know is they're less than the Stanford alumni trips, which to me are too much. Robert, yes.
The Paleolithic art, are there any caves that exist in this situation?
We're going to go there next. We're going to see some of the cave materials next. And there's some fascinating things along the way with those caves. So any other quick questions before? Yes, sir.
Possible?
Yes. It's been in the planning stages for, I think, several generations. But it keeps getting nixed by the ferry companies who will lose their livelihood if a bridge was built. And of course, there are always political issues in Sicily and who owns what. We could talk about that, but let's not get to Judge Giovanni Falcone just yet. Okay. But fascinating, the things about Sicily. And a lot of people ask me, well, if I want to go on my own, can you recommend things? Of course, I can recommend guides, whatever places. And you do have to be careful about sometimes in Sicily traveling or staying. Believe it or not, the best bus companies and the best hotels are owned by certain people that we will not name right now. but it's kind of like insurance. Anyway, but I don't have issues. You probably all know how important Sicily was in World War II, the Allied bridge going to, to take Italy back had to come through Sicily. And there was a great arrangement made with certain Italian families in New York City to make that happen. I have a book about this from the OSS, from a man named Corvo. But anyway, great stories, but let's move on. So let's go to these prehistoric sites, shall we? Let's start with, of course, this one, the Adaura Cave, literally on the flanks of Monte Pellegrino. And this is famous in prehistory because it's that bridge point between the Paleolithic and the Mesolithic. And when you go there, you can walk to the cave, not always easy to get to, but when you go there, you can just see it right here on the north end. And by the way, when you land at the airport, you basically, Isola della Femmina, do you know that famous island? Isola della Femmina? We could talk about that, but you land at the airport, Giovanni Falcone Airport, you drive along this coast to get to Palermo. But there are the Adaura Caves on Pilgrim Mountain, Monte Pellegrino. This is what kind of the area looks like. And this is Mondello. And right there's the Villa Igea. And look at these massive limestone scarps. And it's karstic, meaning it can be eroded with water that carves out some of these caves. And then humans would be living at the base of these cliffs where the Adaura Caves are. And here you can see the ridge above the Villa Igea. And here again, from the top along the mountain. And this landscape, of course, it's mostly forested now, although great for grazing. And you look at it, here's just a picture of Monte Pellegrino in the late 19th century. And these roads go up to monasteries, by the way. And here again, you can see kind of the Adaura village below part of the mountain and the caves. Here again, you can see the caves are right in here. Okay, so if you're looking at them, right in here, the caves, and here you can see them again. See this scarp? You're looking at the heavy shadowed line where the caves are. And that scarp has been there easily 30,000 years. And at the base of that scarp, since water eroded onto that cliffs, the caves are underneath along here. You can see them here and here and here. There you can see some of the mouths of them. And some of them, the entrances may be small, but they could host whole clans 10,000 plus years ago. And here's looking out from one of the caves to the water. You can see another part. So there are about 6 caves in here. And you can't see scale here, can you? But that's easily 60 feet high right inside. Yeah, so you have a lot of carbonization from charcoal and soot from cave fires for food and warmth. Here's another one. So you can see, can you see you're inside? You're inside the cave here. Can you tell? And then, of course, there's cave art, incised work on the limestone, plus a lot of Neolithic flints. In this case, this is about 10,000 years ago, so 8,000 BCE. And these flints, since flint is also found on the island, you had a good source. And some of these flints, you can't quite see the serrated edges, maybe a little bit, but you'd have a cobble that you break, and then you use either you make tools from what breaks off, the debitage, or you could use that as a pounder or grinder or whatever. So if we go inside and look at some of the art, what animal do you recognize there on the left? Can I move that down a little bit? There, that's a little better. Can we, or move it to the right, maybe?
You completely hide.
Oh, thank you. You are so smart, Java.
Mm-hmm.
Better. Okay. Now, do you see what animal would you recognize there with the forward thrusting horns? It is a form of a bovid. It's the original cow or bull that we call Bos primigenius, sort of the firstborn bull. And we know it by the word auroch. Auroch. And they stood 7 feet high at the shoulder. And that's what, that was food for half a year, if you could bring one down before it brought you down. And usually it's a group of people going after them from all directions. But here you can see some of the figures, including people, and probably an auroch hunt here where they've got the animal. And of course, this is a reproduction of that incised work. Now here you can just see frieze details. You see a lot of people, and this almost looks, wow, Matisse-like, doesn't it? Okay. So the natural style of animals and people. And here, I believe I'm seeing dancing going on here. Okay. That's what it looks like, unless there's flight. It's either flight or dance or whatever, we don't know. But now, so we leave the Adara cave, which goes back at least, we know that there's Mesolithic 11,000 BCE, so 13,000 years ago. There's Paleolithic before that, but most of what you see is early Neolithic about 10,000 years ago at the Adara cave. So let's move a little bit west along this coast, the Golfo do Castellamare here. And let's move over now to these three, the Grotto dell'Uzzo, the Grotto dei Cavalli, and Monte Cofano. And by the way, some of these peaks above the sea are just dramatic. So let's start with Grotto dell'Uzzo. Here it is, you see. Now notice that this one goes easily back 20,000 years. So that is Paleolithic. We're talking from the area of the Aurignacian, pre-Magdalenian periods of humans. We're definitely talking about Homo sapiens. But it's very possible that there's Homo neanderthalensis as well on Sicily. And if we go inside some of these caves, I want to look at some of the sequence of materials. You can see it, the limestone scarp. And you can see here by the vegetation that many of these trees are 15 to 20 feet high. So, and can you see multiple caves inside? Now look at the sequence of finds. You can go way back to, easily Paleolithic, 22,000 years before the present. And notice the earliest phases show aurochs, bovids, artiodactyls, deer, and birds. But as you keep coming up, suddenly, what happens? Suddenly, between the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, you begin seeing marine life, fish bones, etc. Why? Now, for anybody who can figure this out, why you don't see marine life before about 10,000 years ago, and suddenly you see marine life afterward. Go ahead. Exactly. The sea rose. The sea rose around the Sicilian landscape, which you would not have. You would not have had. You would not have had fish and whales. You wouldn't have had evidence for that before about 10,000 years ago, when the Mediterranean suddenly rose in its level to not far from the lip of the cave. Makes sense, doesn't it? So good logical answer, sir. And I know that you all could have said that, and I don't have enough chocolate balls to go around. But I do have 3 more, so let's see what we get. Now, so you were going to say it, I know. Yeah. So here, that cave, let's continue to look at some of these other ones here. So next, whoops. So now let's do Cofano and then Cavalli, of the horses, the grotto of the horses. Grotta is cave, like rupestra in Italian. And here's the Gulf of Cofano from Erice, and just beautiful. Oh, it is so gorgeous to look back on this from Erice. Here's the area, Monte Cofano. And while we won't necessarily look at everything, in that same sequence, we have the Grotta Mangiapano. Can you see it right here? Okay, right there at Monte Cofano, you have this. And looking at the cave in the hillside, in the scarp of the limestone, can you see there's a cave there with a village growing out of it? Long-term occupation in that cave. Look at that. How would you like to have your house built into the cave? Interesting. There you are. So it's a deep recess, and you can see that the recess, that precipitous recess easily is 200 feet high, with people having lived there for 10,000 years. Now let's go to the De Cavalli here. So here's the cave near Trapani, the cave of the horses. There's from the inside looking out. So you can see it accommodated a large group of people. And this is interesting because of the art inside. Most of this is Neolithic. So you can see ochre paint. I think you can see all kinds of things, perhaps not just abstraction. But now I want to move to another cave in the Egadi Islands, what's called the cave of the Genovese, the cave of Genoa, from the people of Genoa. So when we look at it, the cave of, well, we can keep looking. Oh, by the way, here's Cefalu. You don't really see the cave on the island so much, but here's Cefalu, which you know comes from the Greek word, what? Kephalos, head. Kephalos. You know, so our word cephalus, okay, encephalitis, you can have lots of etymologies here. Brain fever. So Cefalu is the Italian version of the Greek Cephalus, spelled with a K. And above the cathedral, here's a 19th century picture. The cave is massive in that. And if you look at it, can't quite see it here, but inside the cave, again, you have human occupation going back, again, about 10,000 years. So now, I want to come now to the Genovese cave on the Egadi Islands, on the island of Levanzo. And when you look at it, here it is right there. Here so you can see again about 8,000 BCE, 10,000, so we call Epi-Paleolithic. So on the Paleolithic, which would correspond to Mesolithic, but not Neolithic, and you can see the cave here. And then you go inside the cave, right now, not too far from the seashore, but above any kind of water flooding. And look at this. What again do you see? An auroch incised into the wall. So the big Bos primigenius. And you see other animals too. Can you see the animal here? It's either an artiodactyl, sort of like a stag or a doe, probably. And then, of course, that auroch. And then notice here, if you look closely, can you see what may be a horse? The head of the horse. Okay. So a lot of animal life in these caves. And then if you blow this one up here to this, again, you see what probably is an artiodactyl, some kind of deer. So a lot of art incised on the walls of these caves. And of course, people. You not only see people and the auroch and deer, you see all these people. It seems like they're mostly depicting male, but you also have what may be a gravid animal. Again, I think it's a deer or doe, possibly pregnant, which if it's gravid or pregnant, that suggests more deer, more food. But look at this. What do you see? What is this one? It's an elephant. I don't think it can be anything else. Most depictions identify that as an elephant. They also identify dolphins and porpoises, and so on, see? So this one would be moving from early to middle Neolithic, about 5,000 BCE, but a lot of activity painted. In this case, you saw the ochre paintings with red earth, but these are charcoal. And then what happens with a little bit of precipitation inside these caves over time, the karstic limestone dissolving covers these paintings and preserves them, but you can actually date them by two ways. You can date them by the recalcification over them, the rate of recalcification, like a veneer of calcite, but you can also date when they're not covered, the carbon by radiocarbon dating of the charcoal paintings. we can get some pretty precise datings on some of these. In grad school, I worked at the radiocarbon lab for the U.S. Geological Service. And I really trust radiocarbon dating. I wouldn't have trusted it 50 years ago, but we've refined it now. And especially the accelerator mass spectrometry. But anyway, radiocarbon dating gives us good dates. So those are some of these caves. And here's that Moricofano and the Cape San Vito, beautiful, beautiful landscapes with limestone massifs jutting out of the water. It looks almost tropical, doesn't it? Now, let's go to the last one in the Iblea Mountains, Pantalica, way down near Siracusa. And if we look at this one, it's more Bronze Age. It's not prehistoric in the sense of being Neolithic or Stone Age. This is what we call Bronze Age. And these are caves that are burial sites in the hills at Pantalica, going right to essentially the time when the Greeks came. We don't know exactly who did this. Judging by where it is on the island, I'd probably say it's most likely the Sikeli, some of those early people. The Elemians came, the Sikani came, the Sikeli came, and the Elemians seem to have come mostly from Africa and the Maghreb, and the Sikel seem to mostly come from Anatolia and the Levant. The Sikani came apparently mostly from Italy, but these different groups that came, notice when we look at this cave, this is what on the Anapo River Valley, which flows eventually to Siracusa, not quite, the Simeta flows directly to Siracusa. You can just see these grottos and caves, and the Byzantine village here, another Byzantine village here. You can see the different cemeteries, necropoli, and then this interesting idea of an anacteron, which is a Greek word, since the Greeks were here from about the 8th century onward, BCE. And look at these necropoli. So little caves in that ridge, and you can see out from some of them. A little dangerous to climb into them if you're, unless you go to more accessible ones. But this is the Anapo River Gorge. And notice that Pausanias, the Roman medical doctor who wrote the best book of travels we have from antiquity, said that Hybla Creatus is a village in Catania with a sanctuary of the goddess Hyblea, held in honor by Sicily. And of course, it was famous for honey, very famous for its apiaries and honey, as Pausanias tells us. So here you can just see from inside some of these rock-cut tombs with sort of cubiculi and so on, and letting light in as well. And there, again, looking at the entrances. Now, this is interesting. That's a structure on the ground below the hills, underneath those scarps. And if you look closely at it, it's dated to the Mycenaean period. From the city of Mycenae in mainland Greece. We can't say it was built by them. However, the architecture is definitely Mycenaean, with large ashlar block walls. You can see them here. And so notice, like so many walls, on the outside or on the inside, it looks pretty straight, but that's because they're lining up rocks with rubble filling the sort of loose interior, which is good because in seismic activity, that rubble takes a lot of the stress. So this is what we call the Mycenaean period, about 13th century BCE, so roughly 3,300 years ago or so. And the Greek word anakteron is a word for something that can eventually become either palatial or religious temple built by these peoples at this time. And looking at it, we also know you can date this by the rubble. Sometimes you have potsherds inside. So when they broke pottery up, they put the pottery in the middle of the walls as rubble fill. Then you can, when you excavate, you can dig some pottery and you can date the pottery too. And you can date the style of the pottery and the people's style who made it. So a lot of things that you can deduce. But so this would be late Bronze Age, roughly the same time as the epic heroes of Homer and the Trojan War and so on. So now, looking again at the peoples who came to Sicily. The Elymians, because remember, this is Cape Lulubayan, and Africa, today Tunisia is only 100 miles from here. And then you can see the 3 mile bit on the Strait of Messina right here. So the Sicani apparently came first from Italian sources. Then the Elymians came from Africa. Then the Sicels came from the Levant, across the Ionian Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. So these are the 3 peoples that we can see in prehistory, mostly what we would call the last 3,000 years. And then, of course, the Greeks came somewhere about 760 BCE, after these 3 cultures and peoples had led. And you can see their different ethnicities and cultures in their remnants here in Sicily. So the name of the group called the Sicels gave their name to Sicily. We have a great Roman historian called Diodorus Siculus. He was a Sicel, a very good historian. But of course, he's writing in the time of the Roman world, which is after. So these people came, and then the Greeks came, and then the Phoenicians came, and then the Carthaginians came, but that's in weeks to follow. Now, let's look again at these migrations. So migration easily reaching Sicily by water, but it's very likely, as we can already say, we know there were people there before then because of the caves, going back at least 20,000 years, when people could cross on dry land. Well, there wasn't a Mediterranean Sea. So we know this place has possibly been occupied for up to easily 100,000 years or earlier. And when we think about that, it would be very likely, it hasn't been found yet, but I suspect, and I'm going to dangle a possible treat here for incentive. What might you suspect? Where could we find older sites that we don't have now? Where? Under the water, exactly. We could find, if the Mediterranean Sea had not risen up, it's possible there are other sites below water level today. Make sense? Yeah. So I would suspect some maritime archaeology could find something, but then of course the salinity of the Mediterranean is not good for the preservation of organic materials that would be back in the Neanderthal period. However, these different migrations, and of course, later on the Romans, the first Punic War we'll talk about was fought over Sicily because Cato the Elder and others were worried about how close Carthage was to Italy. But that's a whole nother story coming up. Now, did you know 19 different types of olive trees in Sicily? Some have greenish leaves, some have silvery leaves. The fruits, the different olives themselves, some look long, like acorns. You have all different types of shapes of olives and tastes. And some of the trees we'll see in Agrigento are easily well over, some are not quite as old as the Garden of Gethsemane. In Hebrew, gat is oil press, semen is oil. So, we have oil presses that go back in Agrigento, ancient Akragos, possibly 2,000 years. And I see olive trees at Agrigento that are easily well over 1,000 years old. And they're hollow on the inside because all the xylem is deteriorated. But that's what the life isn't on the inside of a tree, it's on the outside, as you probably know. Be very careful about your arborists wanting to cut your trees down because they're hollow. They're perfectly, probably fine, even if they're hollow and old. But anyway, olive trees in Agrigento, well over 1,000 years old, still producing bumper crops of olives. So olives in Sicily, a very important food staple, like the semolina wheat from the durum. So rich, rich, rich agriculture. And by the way, this is in Agrigento. And when I take pictures of some of these places, you can walk across the Villa Athena in Agrigento. It's an old villa by a British aristocrat who was archaeology buff. You walk between olive trees, and if it's just been plowed, you kick out thousands of green postures. Many of them painted. Of course, you're not supposed to take them. I can't. But it's a rich site. Now, thinking of the genetic diversity and richness of Sicily too, and the mythology, I'm going to come back to this. Do you know the prince, the duke, Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa? Of course you do, because you saw a movie about the leopard. Yes, did you see that movie? Burt Lancaster playing the duke. He didn't have to speak so much, but this great writer published everything posthumously. He was an aristocrat and living, you can see his villa right in Palermo as well. Do you remember places like Donna Fugata? Well, if you're buying wine from Sicily, if it's the Donna Fugata wine, snatch it up. Or if it's Planeta or Corvo or Etna, I mean, really good wine in Sicily. And it's usually, I would say 1/10 the cost of a Super Tuscan of Bulgari or Sassicaia, or if it's really good wine. Not all wine is good, and I don't have time to drink much, but Giuseppe di Lampedusa talked about the estates of Donna Fugata in the middle of the island. If you read Il Gatto Pardo, which really doesn't perfectly translate to the leopard, but that's his famous work. However, he wrote these beautiful little short stories and novellas, like this one. In English, it's now just called The Siren, but the Italian name, you might understand why I might like it. It's Il Professore e la Sirena, the professor and the siren. Does that sound like a fantasy? Well, it's a beautiful story. I urge you to read it. I might read a small excerpt when we get to that part of the class, but mythologically, if you think of some of the famous sirens in history, Sirena, one of them that lived on the Ionian coast, her name was Ligeia. And literally, this story is about Ligeia's attraction to a young Greek scholar who she teaches archaic Greek. And otherwise, I could talk about other elements, which gets a bit erotic, but it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. And I try to reread it each year. Do you have things you reread each year?
Yeah.
Your favorites? Such as, well, of course, Shakespeare, Byron, Shelley, Dante, Goethe, whatever you might read. Rilke, yeah. So I try to read, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Danielle Steele, sure, why not? I don't know if she's here today, but some people love her work because she just writes the same book over and over and over again, and changes the names. But she's not the only one who does that, does she? However, this work is, I can only describe it best by one adjective: magical. It will make you weep over the beauty of this story, which he never published. Everything was posthumous. He should have won the Nobel laureate, but he never submitted anything to press. And yet, a sophisticated reader of mythology. So please look this up, bless you if you can. The old professor was the young Greek student who was reciting Greek on his boat over the water when she appeared, and changed his life forever. So there is a picture of Ligeia, and then the young man becomes an old, venerable, renowned professor of Greek. Anyway, what a story. Now, what about Sicilian DNA? Now, I may be biased, but I've been to Sicily more times than I can count. And every time I go, I'm astonished at the beauty of the people. Now, the young ladies, usually under about 20, too much pasta can wreak havoc on your figure, but they're beautiful. And it's possibly, as you recall, Gregor Mendel, do you remember Mendel's laws? Remember, Gregor Mendel came, as far as we know, from a Jewish family that converted to Catholicism. Like our Jesuit community here, right? Gregor Mendel, what did he observe when he started hybridizing different plants? He came up with a term called hybrid vigor. The broader your DNA, the wider your DNA sources, usually the healthier, the more protection and benefits you receive. And I think the physical beauty of Sicily proves that hybrid DNA vigor. Just beautiful people. I won't go into too many details. Very often, when I'm in Taormina, I'm usually there for the Taormina Film Festival. And, you know, I have to be careful from going gaga over the beauty in that place because Sicily is so beautiful. The last time I was there, I was playing the piano on the great terrace of the Hotel Grand Tomeo because the maitre d' was a friend, and he said, you know, Professore Patricio, come play the piano. So I was playing the piano, playing some of my, you know, fun compositions. I was playing and playing and playing. And finally, he said, now, you know, that there's a famous American diva here tonight that you come for your anniversary dinner. I said, yeah. He said, well, did you see that super yacht down in the water below? I said, yeah, we did see that with a helicopter pad. And he said, well, she gave a concert last night at the great Greco-Roman theater, which we'll talk more about this, but I said, well, who's that diva? And he said, well, you just played for Barbra Streisand. He said, here, come. He grabbed me, pulled me over to her table. She looked up and I. Me? What am I going to say to her? And she, you know, Howell said, oh, divine Barbara, here's one of her biggest fans. You know what that means? I can't believe I'm in the same restaurant, the same city, in the same planet as you. I had about 10 seconds to escape, which was to the table next to hers, where Paolo put us. Anyway. Now, Taormina is like that. Taormina is like Sicily. It's a magical place. And you probably know how many artists and writers stayed there, lived there, and so on. Not just D.H. Lawrence and Hemingway, and so many people stayed there. But this DNA of look at what's going on there. You've got DNA coming from everywhere. And you've got Luvian and Anatolian DNA and Balkan DNA and African DNA and R1b ancestral European DNA. So it's a rich DNA mix. So why Sicily? Well, here are the reasons we will look in more detail for the next 7 weeks. The largest island of the Mediterranean, the crossroads of history, long occupation for many thousands of years, best preserved Greek and Roman and Byzantine materials, Baroque, etc. Wonderful traditions in tiles and Maiolica, and food. Food. Best glimpse of old Italy, as Goethe says. Trinacria, the magical island of mythology. Thank you. Okay. I try to not keep you late. Any questions? Yeah, we'll go into now all this detail over the next 7 weeks. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Yes.
Recommend a detailed map that I could get a hold of.
A map?
Yeah, Sicily.
Yeah, yeah. The Italian National Tourist Bureau, ENIT, some, and I will pretty much suspect that the Italian consulate here in San Francisco would be a good source, or a map store.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the best map store I know is in Chelsea, London, called the Map House. But you can order online. I'm always looking for maps. I may have one. If you remind me, I'll look through my map. I have a huge map collection. I may have one. It may be slightly tatty, but I probably have a good map of Sicily.
My mom, Palermitano,
Oh.
my dad, Ugitano.
Wow.
Agrigento.
Wow, 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 wow.
So this is blowing my mind.
Well, and
I
it's
thought I knew.
it's not just the Corleones. No. Yeah, I have some very good friends who worked for, anyway. But let's see if I have a map. would you email me?
I shall.
Let me give you my email and I'll look and see if I've got a good map. So it's,
How can we sign up for 2026?
you just tell me and let me give you my email, so I'm giving him,
Okay,
and then I'll pass that to my wife, who's the keeper. She's sitting outside in the car right now too, but I bet you if we all went through and said, we need another trip, she would listen. So my email's phunt
okay.
at Stanford, STANFORD
Yeah.
.edu. Not bad for a Cal Berkeley grad, right?
What was the first part?
P Hunt. It's my P, my name P and Hunt.
Sponsors the.
They're private. private.
Okay.
We go through, I should tell you, we go through an agency in Messina that's been there